We just did one song. We're going to go ahead and get started. Last week, what we tried to do when I'm talking is I'm trying to answer questions that you're probably going to run into most likely when you talk to an atheist or an evolutionist. The first week we talked about what a scientific theory is because to them a scientific theory is based on facts. It's so when they think of the theory of evolution, they're not saying it's some kind of guess. They think it's solid. Well, the first week what we did was we showed that evolution, as far as molecules to man, doesn't fit into even the definition of a scientific theory. It is a religion and a belief. And then last week we talked about carbon dating, the different dating methods. A lot of people will tell you, well, carbon dating proves that the Earth is billions of years old. And we showed last week that that's not true at all. For one thing, carbon dating can only date organic material that once took in carbon. Humans, animals, plants, and it can only date up to, even the evolutionists say, 80,000 years. So carbon dating doesn't prove anything is billions of years old. They do have things that date igneous rocks. That's those other dating, potassium, argon, and that. And we looked at that a little bit later. You can go to the next slide. We talked about how carbon-14, which is what they use to date carbon dating, how it's produced. It's produced from cosmic rays that bombard our atmosphere. And they make a lot of big assumptions. They assume like the rate and the ratio to carbon-14 in our atmosphere has always been the same. So what they do, like what you find out with all of these things, you find out what they do first is they deny the Bible. They say that it is not true. It's a myth, just like Greek mythology to them. And so they start with that foundation, and there's the big problem, because if the Bible is true, things were completely different before the flood. We talked a little bit on the next slide about the ice canopy or the vapor canopy that is talked about in Genesis, how it would block cosmic rays, ultraviolet rays completely, and the oxygen. He talked a little bit on Sunday about the oxygen in the atmosphere would have been much, much higher with the vapor canopy. We talked about right now we have 6 layers in our atmosphere. I can't name them all off the top of my head. Ionosphere and all those. They 6 layers. And what a kind of cool thing is, 6 in the Bible always stands for man. We were made on the 6th day, and over you see 6 stands for man. But with that vapor canopy, we would have 7 layers, and that's usually complete, perfection, is 7. But the sin of man is what brought that down, during the flood and when the earth was destroyed. So it's just it's really cool symbolism when you look at it from that point. Okay, next slide. Even Josephus, he was a very famous Jewish historian. He talked about the crystalline canopy that surrounded the earth. So tradition of creation handed down over the generations through the Jewish tradition showed that there was a crystalline canopy and the original design. Then we talked about Earth's magnetic field. That's what blocks the cosmic rays now to an extent. Of course, there's a lot that gets through this, but our magnetic field is generated from the molten rock inside our core of the Earth, and it blocks a lot of the radiation and the cosmic rays, but since they started measuring the strength of it in the 1800s, it's been 10% weaker than it was even then today. So it is getting weaker and weaker and allowing more and more in. So even with the magnetic field that they can clearly measure right now, that the carbon-14 was totally different back in the day. So when you date things, it's going to make things look a lot older because there was a lot less carbon in the atmosphere. We looked at Mount St. Helens. You can go ahead into the next slide. That top left, Mount St. Helens, it laid those layers that looks like Grand Canyon almost in a matter of hours. And they just show, that's Grand Canyon on the bottom right. And this dome was what formed. This was in 1980 when this thing blew. That dome, it formed a lava dome over the mouth of it. And so this group called the Rate Group, they went and they wanted to test the evolutionary dating methods. So they went there and they took evolutionists with them to make sure they could hold them accountable. They dated this thing. They knew it was 27 years old. This was in 2007, and it dated at 2.4 million years old. We looked at a lot of these. Remember, I had slide after slide. There was like things they knew how old it was because they saw it blow, And they were like 40 years and they'd come back at 3.6 million. I mean, the dating methods just don't work. And a lot of it's because of their assumptions. In the video last week, we started talking about dinosaurs. That's a big question for a lot of Christians. What about dinosaurs? You look at kids' books over and over, they're like 65 million years ago, and it's like over and over, it's pounded into us that dinosaurs lived way before man, and death brought man rather than what the Bible teaches. A lot of people will say, well, why isn't dinosaur in the Bible? We don't see it in the Bible at all. Well, one reason is the King James Bible was translated to English in 1611, and the word dinosaur wasn't invented until 1841, so it's not going to be in the Bible. It's not, that word isn't. It was invented by Sir Richard Owen, and so there's a 230-year gap there. It's not going to be in the Bible. But Tom kind of alluded to this last week when we were kind of talking about it. In Job 40, it talks about behemoth. If you read that carefully, it says he eats grass like an ox. Behold, his strength is his loins, his power in the muscles of his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar. The sinews of the thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Let his maker bring near his sword. A lot of people, if you read commentaries, they'll say, well, this is an elephant or a hippopotamus, But and a lot of times, a lot of these commentaries, you got to really watch, because a lot of them believe in the day-age theory and all these theories because they believe evolution has to be true because scientists say it is. So they try to fit that into the Bible rather than the other way around. But it talks about the tail being like a cedar. I mean, have you ever seen the tail of an elephant or a hippo? They're just like little flaps of skin is what they are. It's not a tail of a cedar tree whatsoever, but it does represent or closely look like a Brachiosaurus or one of those big dinosaurs like that. Okay, I kind of mentioned this last week too, and this is a really interesting thing that should make you go, whoa, I never even thought about that. But this is off of a secular science website. This is a moment in science. Which is true when it comes to animal growth? A, they reach a particular size and stop growing. B, keep growing indefinitely. Or C, all of the above. Next slide tells the answer, which is if you guess C, congratulations. We talked about this last week because there's many animals, not many, but some animals that never stop growing until the day they die. Their skeletons just keep growing until the day they die. And among those are amphibians, lizards, snakes, reptiles. They never stop growing until the day they die, believe it or not. But this talks about why they don't get unbelievably big. Like we talked about the Komodo dragon. That thing gets big, Can you imagine before the flood, when people lived to be 900 years old, how big would those lizards get? You can imagine a Komodo dragon, they live 30 years. Can you imagine it living 500 years or 400 years? How big would that thing get? And I think this is where a lot of the answers lie with dinosaurs. And a lot of cultures, we find in caves and all sorts of stuff, they find drawings. These are civilizations that predate, finding dinosaur fossils and having museums and all this stuff, okay? This is way before that. They find drawings of dinosaur-looking creatures. This one's kind of cool. It's kind of a bad picture. I had trouble finding a high-resolution one, but this is in the Black Dragon Canyon in Utah, and it looks sort of like a pterodactyl type dinosaur. Well, it just so happens when they did a lot of digs in this area and the Black Dragon Canyon, and guess what they found there? Next slide. Thousands of pterodactyl fossils in this Black Dragon Canyon. This is just another drawing. They find tons of these all over, and that area is like a big one. They find it's like a dinosaur graveyard there. There's lots of cultures that have little sculptures and pillars with things that look just like dinosaurs that way predate when people were supposed to know about dinosaurs. Last week they talked about a triceratops horn that they found, and he had broken it apart, and what they found inside was cells, and they actually found triceratops skin that was stretchable, and also, remember that, he looked under the microscope, But they didn't really go on and on about it. But this was not an isolated incident. There's been many of these. This is one that's a mummified dinosaur carcass of a duck-billed hydrosaur is what it's called. But all of the skin is there, and its soft tissue is still there. 90% of the fossil includes muscle, nail material, a beak, and skin that had been preserved. If this thing was 65 million years old, it would not last that long. Not nearly. This is kind of a description of it. His fossilized skeleton is covered in soft tissue, skin, scales, muscle, foot pads, and even his last meal was in his stomach. His stomach contents are so well preserved that researchers can tell what he had his last supper, a salad of ferns, conifers, and magnolias. The stomach also contained the pollen of more than 40 different plants. It's pretty amazing. This one is 2005. They found a T-Rex bone. They said, and this is a secular site here, so that what they start out with is a 70 million year old Tyrannosaurus rex fossil dug out a hunk of a sandstone, yielded soft tissue, including blood vessels, and perhaps even whole cells. What they had to do was when they were taking it away in the helicopter, they had to break the bone because it was so big, it wouldn't fit, so they broke the bone. And they found all of this inside, including blood vessels and everything. Next slide will show some of that under a microscope. You can see there's blood cells. Those on the left, that white, those are actually blood vessels. All soft tissue. Next slide. Yeah. This one was supposed to be 70 million years old. Tissue like this, and this is a high estimate, 10,000 years. I can't imagine tissue lasting that long unless it was preserved just perfectly. But it is definitely not 70 million years old. So with that, we just wanted to, that's just touching the surface, of what you can talk about with dinosaurs. There's all sorts of stuff, and we've just had it pounding in our head for so long about how old they are and that they didn't live with man and all this stuff, but they were created the same day that all the other land animals were created. And, probably many of them went on the ark, but afterwards, there's a lot of reasons why the dinosaurs probably went extinct. One, when they come out, very scarce vegetation, and this is one of the reasons why God said, okay, you can eat meat now. And probably, those dinosaurs had a lot of meat on them, so they were probably one of the first ones to go. I had this question asked me by somebody last week. I asked, if you have any questions, just let me know and I'll talk about it. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer. Because, when you're talking about this kind of stuff, man, you can get into a lot of stuff. And this is a really good one. This is one that a lot of people have. When you talk about starlight and the distance stars are from us and we can see the light from them, scientists will tell you, okay, this one is, let's say it's 100 light years away. They'll use that. That's actually a distance. It's not a time, 100 light years. Basically, light travels at 186,000 miles per second. It's really fast. I think it's 670 million miles per hour, even more than that. But it's really, really fast. So if something is 100 light years away, it would take that light going that fast 100 years to reach Earth, to where we could see it. And right now, they estimate with the best telescopes they have, the farthest star they can see is 55 million light years away. This is what they say. And the way they do that is kind of interesting, but it's kind of, the accuracy of it, I don't know. But it is really, really far away. There's no doubt about that. But what they do is the Earth, it's at a certain position with the sun during the summer, and it's at the complete other side during the winter, It goes around the sun. So what they do, they use trigonometry and they make a triangle. They measure to the star from this, and then 6 months later, they measure to the star and see the difference. And then they make a big triangle. But once you get so far, it gets so narrow, and so that the accuracy is just, it's kind of guessing. You can't be super accurate. But they are really, really far away. So they're saying, well, the farthest star we can see is 55 million light years away. So it would take 55 million years for it to get here. The Earth is at least 55 million years old. So that's the main argument, and it is a good one. There is an appearance of age, when you look at it. Like, there's several things, like we talked about the magnetic field. if the Earth was billions of years old, the magnetic field would be gone. It's getting weaker and weaker. There's tons of things you can look at. The moon is getting farther from the Earth. There's all sorts of things you can look at that show that the universe can't be that old, But there is like a small percentage when you look at it on the surface, you're like, oh man, But 90-some% of it kind of points to a young universe. But the evolutionists will focus on this 7% and ignore the 93%, But basically, one thing we know for sure with the starlight is God created it, and it was visible on earth on day 4, the day he created it. And we're going to look at that in Scripture. Genesis 1, 14 through 19, it says, God said, let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. That's very important. Okay, all of these things that he put in the sky, the sun and the moon, all these things are to mark off months and years, but also the stars are to be signs, and we kind of talked about that quite a bit when we're talking about end times and Revelation. It comes into play a lot. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth. So they're to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser to govern the night. He also made the stars. That's how awesome our God is. We talked about there's an estimated 1 septillion stars that we can see. And it just says, and God made those 2. That's how awesome our God is. It's unbelievable. But God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw it was good, and there was evening and morning the 4th day. Okay, next slide just talks about Exodus 20. This is in 6 days God created. We know that those are literal days. That is the 10 Commandments where he tells them what they're supposed to do for work. 6 days you work, 1 day you have off. Days weren't longer than 24-hour days. That shows you right there it wasn't. He didn't tell them to work for 6,000 years and take 1,000 off. He told them work 6 days, take 1 day off. Psalm 19 says, the heavens declare the glory of God. God didn't say, in 55 million years, the heavens are going to declare my glory. They declared his glory from day 4 on. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made and all the host of them. And for he commanded and they were created. So he spoke and it was created. And I believe that the light was instantaneous, that they could see it on that day. And there is an appearance of age, but just think about this. The whole earth probably had an appearance of age. It was a mature earth. He said on day 3 that he brought forth the land. It came out of the waters. There's hills and mountains. And it probably, if you looked at it, you'd think, oh, this probably took quite a while for this to form. It were slow processes. You could probably say that on day 3 when the land first showed up. Adam and Eve, when they were created, they were probably looked like they were about 30 years old, Did Eve have hair? I bet you she did. She probably had long, beautiful hair. If you take someone's hair, you can see their nutritional habits, what they ate, all sorts of history. What would you have saw if you'd have took some of Eve's hair, and did probably whatever all things God made her out of, But there's an appearance of age from the very beginning because God made a mature universe. He made and he made it so that we could see his glory on that 4th day. Now, how he did that, we don't know for sure. We don't know if it was some miraculous thing where he just, boom, or if there's some natural process that's still even going on today. We don't know if the speed of light is constant in all situations. We don't know any of that. We live on this little blue marble, and the universe is gargantuan. The scientists will act like they know everything, but they do not, There's a lot of theories out there. If you want to read on those scientific theories and creationists just get with me and I can give you some resources. They're very scientific, and a lot of it's like, it's kind of hard to follow. But a lot of them go by the theory of relativity because they've shown that time is constrained by gravity and by speed and all sorts of things changes time. They've shown that time passes faster in space than it does on Earth, and things like that. So they use like a lot of those kind of theories to explain how it could have naturally been done, but it may just as well God said boom, and did a miraculous thing. We don't know.
Hey Ryan, one thing I read a lot about the whole light situation, because if I was an evolutionist, if I was an atheist, I think the best thing to stand on for them is to say what you just said. That star right there that you see tonight,
Yeah.
it's 55 million light years away. That means it took 55 million years for the light to reach us, traveling crazy speeds.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, it must have been there 55 million years ago.
Right.
Or we wouldn't be able to see it. The light wouldn't be here yet. The problem with that is twofold. Number one, you're assuming that evolution is true and not the
Right.
Bible. Because the Bible said the very first thing God created was light.
Yeah.
Let there be light. Well, there was no sun to provide that light. There was no stars to reflect the light off of it. But yet light was present. So where did that light come from?
Right.
So there's obviously something about light in the beginning that we don't know about yet.
Right.
Which would have made the stars visible at day one.
Yeah.
Or as soon as he created.
Right. And like that's another thing, like I was said earlier, no, they start with the fact that they believe the Bible isn't true. Well, is this, a lot of times they'll say, well, that's deceiving of God to do that, to make it look like it's not deceiving because God told you what he did.
Right.
It's just you're not believing what he said. That's the real problem. He told you he created it. He made it so they could see it on day one because it declared his glory. He commanded it and it was so, So he tells us, it's just that they don't want to accept, what God said, So like Duncan said, we don't know exactly how God did it. A lot of things, he gave us what we needed, in his word. We don't need to know absolutely everything right now. But he definitely was not deceitful. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started so we don't go too much past 7:30. But we got the last part of our documentary.
Hey, this is Pastor Duncan Davis at Impact Church. Thank you for listening today. We hope and pray that today's message has impacted your life for Christ. We pray that you'll impact others' lives for Christ. Come and fellowship with us at Impact Church on Sunday mornings at 10:30. Have a great day and God bless you.